The hum of an old percolator filled my kitchen, steady as a heartbeat, while dawn painted Lake Meridian in silver and rose. I'd woken early, same as every morning, to watch the mist creep across the water like it had secrets to keep. The smell of cedar from my grandfather's dock mixed with coffee grounds and quiet memory. Then I saw the glint of metal. Through the window, 3 figures moved down the shoreline, careful as thieves. The first was a woman in a tailored coat, her heels sinking in the damp earth with every impatient step. Karen Brightwater, HOA president, real estate broker, newly minted tyrant. The other 2 followed like shadows, one carrying bolt cutters, the other holding a clipboard, as if that would make trespassing respectable. A sheriff's deputy trailed behind them, his expression caught somewhere between boredom and discomfort. I set the coffee down and wiped the steam from the glass to be sure I wasn't imagining it. No, they were heading straight for the dock. For my grandfather's boat. The old cruiser sat moored in still water, its white hull streaked with years of honest use. Clifford Wendell had bought her in 1985 with cash from his carpentry jobs, the kind of man who trusted would grain more than bankers. He taught me to fish off that deck, told Navy stories while I coiled rope with hands too small to do it right. That boat wasn't just a boat. It was the last piece of him still floating. Karen didn't see history. She saw leverage. By the time I opened the back door, she was already waving a paper like it was a court order, her perfume colliding with the cold lake air. "Mr. Wendell," she called, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your vessel violates community aesthetic standards. You have 72 hours to remove it or face daily fines." I walked down the dock slowly, letting the boards creak under my boots. The deputy nodded at me, apologetic. The 2 board members avoided eye contact, but Karen stared like she was already victorious. "Funny thing about this dock," I said, stopping just short of her clipboard brigade. "My grandfather built it by hand. Never needed an HOA to tell him it looked fine." Her smile was thin, the kind that belonged on someone already drafting your obituary. "This isn't personal. We have property values to protect. That," she gestured at the cruiser as though pointing at a corpse, "is a blight on our lakefront community." "Community?" I echoed. "When did that start meaning you and your friends?" Her nostrils flared. "We voted." "I didn't." She shrugged like it didn't matter. 72 hours, Mr. Wendell. I'd hate for this to escalate." The bolt cutters glinted in the early light. The threat wasn't subtle. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take. Something old and hard stirred in me. The same thing that kept me steady on a pitching deck in the Indian Ocean while fire alarms screamed and men shouted for help. You learn fast in the Navy. Some things you don't give up. Not ground. Not your crew. Not family. I stepped closer until I could smell the lavender perfume clinging to Karen's coat. "You try to touch that boat," I said evenly, "and you'll wish you'd read a few more law books before you started playing sheriff." The deputy cleared his throat. "Marcus, maybe we can handle this at the next board meeting." Karen cut him off. 72 hours. She turned on her heel and stalked up the dock, the board members scurrying after her. I stood there watching them disappear into the thinning mist, coffee cooling in my hand, anger settling into something sharper. Because this wasn't about a boat. Not really. Karen Brightwater hadn't moved here for the lake view or the peace and quiet. She'd moved here to take something that didn't belong to her. And she'd just declared war on the wrong man. The old cruiser bobbed gently against the pilings, cedar planks creaking under my feet. I ran a hand along the worn rail, the way my grandfather used to when checking the wood for rot. "Don't worry, old girl," I murmured. "We're not going anywhere." But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't bluffing, and this fight was going to get ugly. By noon, the notice was taped to my front door, printed in legalese so stiff it practically smelled of fresh ink and arrogance. Violation of community standards. Remove non-compliant watercraft within 72 hours or incur $500 daily fines. I peeled it off slowly, folding the paper into a square small enough to disappear in my fist. My hand shook, but not from fear. I'd seen this tactic before, back when I was stationed in Norfolk helping a buddy fight an illegal base housing assessment. Paper intimidation. The first move of people who think you won't push back. Inside, my phone buzzed with a message from Ezra Blackstone, my next-door neighbor and the closest thing I had to family out here. Coffee at 3? Heard about your visitor. Ezra was 78, retired schoolteacher, sharp enough to slice through any lie. If Karen had already started whispering around the lake, he'd know. When I walked into his cabin later that afternoon, the place smelled of pipe smoke and strong tea. Ezra sat at the table with 2 mugs and a look that said he'd been expecting me. "She came to see you too?" I asked, dropping the folded notice on the wood. "Last week," Ezra said, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "Offered 200 grand for my place. Cash. Said it was a friendly buyout to help modernize the neighborhood. That's 3 times what it's worth." Ezra sipped his tea, eyes glittering. "Exactly. Nobody pays that unless they know something you don't." I thought about Karen's heels sinking into the lakeshore mud, the bolt cutters flashing in morning light. This wasn't just about property values. It was a pressure campaign. Squeeze the old families until we sold cheap or quit fighting. "You're not selling," I said. Ezra snorted. "Son, I didn't teach 8th graders for 40 years just to get bullied in retirement." We talked for an hour, swapping stories about Karen's sudden rise as HOA president. The meetings timed when working families couldn't attend, the vague new rules about community vision, the Denver transplants voting in lockstep with her. By the time I left, the sun was sliding low over the mountains, painting Lake Meridian copper and gold. That night, I sat on my grandfather's dock with a legal pad and a bottle of bourbon. I made a list, every original family still living here, every petty violation letter they'd gotten, every rumor Karen had spread. I marked times and dates when her security patrol boats idled too close to my property. My Navy training had taught me one thing above all: documentation wins battles. The first call came the next morning. Mrs. Henderson down the shore, the woman who still baked pies for every funeral in town, said Karen had cited her vegetable garden for being inconsistent with the planned aesthetic. A garden. Then the Torinos told me their kid's tire swing was a liability issue. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged. Karen wasn't just picking on me. She was building a case to clear out anyone who wouldn't fit her vision of a high-end resort community. By Friday, I'd spent 3 afternoons at the county courthouse flipping through musty files that hadn't been touched since Reagan was president. My fingers came away black with dust, but the deeper I dug, the more my pulse quickened. The original land surveys showed inconsistencies, boundary lines that didn't match modern GPS maps, missing signatures on HOA and corporation documents. And then came a note. I found it tucked under my truck's windshield wiper after a grocery run. Plain white paper. Neat handwriting. Check the lake deed. Not everything is what it seems. A friend. For 3 days, it burned a hole in my pocket while I worked on the dock and pretended to live my life. Who left it? A neighbor scared to speak up? Someone inside Karen's own circle? By Sunday night, I couldn't wait any longer. I drove east to Denver, past darkening pine forests and empty highways, until I reached the state archives, a squat concrete building that looked like it hadn't smiled since it was built. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses taped at the bridge, raised an eyebrow when I asked for land record from 1981. "Basement vault," she said, disappearing down a hallway. "No one's looked at those in years." I sat at a long oak table while she returned with 2 thick folders dusted and gray. And there, in brittle pages typed on a manual typewriter, I found the first clue that everything Karen believed about Lake Meridian was wrong. The map spread across the oak table looked ordinary enough, faded lines tracing a blue oval of water with neat black borders. But the more I studied it, the more my stomach sank. The deed from 1982 wasn't just a scrap of family history. It was a bomb waiting to go off. My grandfather hadn't merely purchased lakefront property. He bought the entire southern basin of Lake Meridian, water, bed, mineral rights, and every inch of access easement. I traced the boundary line with a calloused finger, heart pounding. Karen Brightwater thought she was fighting over a boat. She was actually trying to steal a lake. The clerk, a thin woman who smelled faintly of paper dust and peppermint, glanced at me over her glasses. "Find what you were looking for?" "More than I bargained for," I muttered, carefully sliding the brittle pages into a manila folder. On the drive home, Headlights cut through the mountain darkness, but my mind was somewhere else. This wasn't just about me anymore. If Karen pushed her resort scheme through, every original family would lose what my grandfather fought to protect. When I turned into my gravel driveway, I knew I wasn't paranoid. A black SUV idled across the road with its lights off. It drove away slow as I pulled in, not fast enough to be casual, not slow enough to be friendly. The next morning, I found sugar poured into my boat's fuel tank. Crystals like wet sand sparkling in the sun. The mechanic's voice echoed in my head from years back. Seen this before. Malicious. Cost a fortune to fix. By noon, a sheriff's deputy I barely knew was at my door with a formal warning about disturbing behavior. Karen had filed a harassment complaint, claiming I'd intimidated neighbors. It was genius in its evil simplicity, turned my investigation into a weapon against me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Ezra and Mrs. Henderson, the two people I trusted most on the lake. The old clock ticked on the wall, steady as a heartbeat. "She's escalating fast," Ezra said, setting down his mug. "Security boats, flyers, now false reports. She's building a paper trail to make you look unstable." Mrs. Henderson reached across the table, her fingers thin and strong. "Marcus, you have to fight this. Not just for you. For all of us." I looked at their lined, honest faces and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was an ambush. By Friday, Karen's game went public. A process server showed up during my nephew's birthday barbecue, handing me a restraining order in front of 12 stunned family members. The kids stopped mid-bite, hamburgers dangling in the air as the man read off charges about violent threats toward community leadership. The humiliation burned hotter than the grill's smoke. Karen wasn't trying to win a legal battle. She was trying to break me. That night, the anonymous note in my pocket felt heavier than ever. Check the lake deed. Not everything is what it seems. I checked, and now I knew why someone wanted me to see it. My grandfather's purchase wasn't just valuable. It was untouchable, and that made me dangerous to Karen's plans. The turning point came 3 days later. Deputy Jim Torino, whose family had lived on the lake as long as mine, caught me in the grocery store parking lot. He glanced around before leaning close, cigarette smoke curling in the air. "Watch yourself, Marcus," he said. "Karen's got friends downtown. Political ones. People who owe her favors." He slipped something into my hand, a folded sheet of paper with a list of names. Developers. Investors. The kind of people who don't take no for an answer. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because I know your grandfather," he said simply. "And I know when someone's trying to steal a man's home." As I drove away, I passed a fresh set of bright orange signs staked along the community shoreline. "No unauthorized watercraft. Violators will be prosecuted." I pulled over, yanked one of the signs out of the ground, and tossed it into the truck bed. If Karen wanted a war, she just made it official. The southern basin of Lake Meridian was mine, and I was done playing defense. The war room started on my grandfather's kitchen table. 3 decades of varnish scarred by coffee mugs and carving knives now covered in legal pads, photocopies, and survey maps that smelled of courthouse dust. I didn't plan it this way. At first, it was just a place to organize my thoughts. But as Karen's harassment spread through the community, the table filled with evidence. Photographs of her security boats leaking oil into the water, letters from neighbors fined for ridiculous violations, timelines of every drive-by, and false complaint. Ezra dropped by one evening carrying a stack of notarized statements. Henderson's, Torinos, the Blackstones, everyone's had enough, he said, sliding the papers across the table. "We're with you." I stared at his handwriting, bold and angry. "This isn't going to end at a board meeting," I said quietly. "She's too invested. There's more money in this than we realized." Ezra nodded grimly. "Then we dig deeper." Over the next week, Karen doubled down. Her Lake Meridian Improvement Committee raised $50,000 from new residents who thought they were funding beautification. In reality, it bought private security patrols that idled outside my cabin day and night, cameras pointed at my dock like I was smuggling contraband. The smear campaign turned personal. Flyers appeared on mailboxes warning that I was a dangerous, unstable veteran. Anonymous calls to the VA triggered wellness checks. Even at the gas station, strangers gave me nervous looks, whispering about the guy who threatened the HOA president. One night, I caught movement on the dock, 3 silhouettes pouring something thick and black into the lake. My new infrared cameras lit them up like ghosts. Karen and 2 board members caught red-handed. By dawn, I'd already sent copies of the footage to my attorney, Deputy Torino, and the EPA's Environmental Crimes Hotline. But Karen wasn't slowing down. 2 days later, a collection agency sent notice of a lien against my property for unpaid HOA fines. An illegal move, since my homestead was never under their authority. I knew it, my lawyer knew it, but Karen was counting on intimidation, not law. Marcus, Rebecca Martinez, my attorney, said over speakerphone, they're manufacturing a paper trail to make you look like the aggressor. We need to counter fast, file harassment, fraud, and environmental complaints before they box you in. And what if that's exactly what she wants? I asked. What if she's pushing me to react? There was a pause on the line. Then we play smarter, Rebecca said. Keep documenting. When this blows up, we'll have a case so tight a federal judge will think it's welded shut. The pressure was eating at me. Nights on the dock no longer smelled of cedar and diesel. They smelled of paranoia. Every passing car felt like surveillance. Every glance from a neighbor carried doubt. Did they believe her? The worst was watching my family get pulled into it. My niece stopped coming over because of those men in sunglasses parked by the driveway. My sister called, voice tight with worry. Marcus, maybe just move the boat. It's not worth it. I wanted to say she was wrong, that this was about more than a boat, about legacy, about not letting a bully steal 40 years of honest living. But in the silence that followed, I felt the weight of her fear. Karen's final move came on the eve of Labor Day weekend. Another emergency HOA meeting to address security threats to the community. The agenda was clear: a vote to remove my boat permanently and escalate enforcement. I looked around the kitchen table that night. Ezra, Rebecca, 2 law students from the university clinic who'd made my case their personal crusade. This isn't just about stopping her, Rebecca said. It's about making sure no one ever tries this again. The folder in front of me was 3 inches thick. Photos, affidavits, water quality reports, legal records proving I owned the lake and the only road leading to it. Enough to crush her scheme if I played it right. But the doubt lingered. What if they didn't care about the truth? What if Karen had already poisoned the well so thoroughly that neighbors, deputies, even reporters believe her story? I closed the folder and stared at the worn cedar planks under my boots. My grandfather's voice echoed in memory. When you build something to last, you do it right the first time. Then we do it right, I said. No shortcuts. No mistakes. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for Karen to walk into it, and pray I didn't break before she did. The Lake Meridian Community Center had never held more than 50 people at once. That night, it held 200. Folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder, Denver News cameras crammed into the back, and a low electric hum in the air that said everyone knew something was about to break. Karen Brightwater stood at the front, immaculate as always, sharp suit, sharper smile. Her voice rang through the room like she already owned it. Tonight, we vote to remove the environmental threat endangering our community. She clicked the remote in her hand, and a photo filled the projector screen. My grandfather's boat, surrounded by digitally added oil slicks. This vessel has been leaking petroleum into our pristine waters for months. I have here, she held up a folder, reports proving contamination. The crowd murmured. Some newer residents nodded along, uneasy but convinced. Old families sat stiff as fence posts, eyes on me in the front row. I rose slowly, the weight of a 3-inch folder in my hand. Ms. Brightwater, I said, voice carrying over the restless chatter. Before you finish, I have a question about your jurisdiction. Her laser pointer froze mid-gesture. The HOA has full authority over community waters, Mr. Wendell. Actually, I said, stepping forward, you don't. I plugged my laptop into the projector, replacing her slide with a grainy scan of my grandfather's 1982 deed. The title block glowed under the fluorescent lights. Clifford Wendell, sole owner, Lake Meridian South. Gas hit the room like thunder. Karen's smile faltered for the first time. This isn't community water, I continued, clicking to the next slide. A professional GPS survey proving my property line extended 50 feet into the North Basin, under every one of those expensive docks Karen had promised to developers. This is private property. My family's property. You've been posting signs, running security boats, and collecting fines on land you don't own. Murmurs turned to shouts. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking like distant gunfire. Karen tried to recover. These documents are fabricated by, The doors at the back opened. Deputy Jim Torino stepped in, followed by two men in dark suits, flashing federal badges. Ms. Brightwater, Jim said, voice steady. We need to speak with you about environmental vandalism and attempted bribery of a law enforcement officer. Her laugh was brittle, high-pitched. This is absurd. I'm protecting this lake. The taller federal agent cut her off. We have video of you dumping motor oil into protected waters, and testimony from your assistant confirming fraudulent liens and harassment campaigns across 4 counties. The crowd erupted. Someone shouted, "We trusted you." Another yelled, "You try to buy us out." Karen's face drained of color. "This is a setup," she hissed, backing away as the agents approached. "He's lying. He's dangerous." I stepped closer, holding up the folder that had consumed my kitchen table for weeks. These are affidavits from every original family you threatened. Water quality reports proving your security boats caused the only contamination this lake has ever seen. And federal conservation records showing this basin is permanently protected. You didn't just pick the wrong fight, Karen. You picked the wrong man. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. The sound was louder than the shouting, louder than the cameras, louder than my own pulse. But the real mic drop moment wasn't her arrest. It came when Agent Martinez from the EPA turned to the room. Mountain Vista Properties is under federal investigation for racketeering and environmental fraud. If you've received offers or threats from this HOA, please stay after the meeting. You are witnesses and victims. Karen's composure shattered. You don't understand, she screamed as they let her out. This lake is worth millions. I could have made you all rich. I waited until the noise died, then faced the room. I'm not selling this lake. I'm protecting it. And starting today, I'm granting every legitimate homeowner here lake access for $1. No fines, no harassment, no scams. The silence cracked, then broke into cheers. Neighbors I hadn't seen smile in years stood and clapped. Some of the newer residents joined in, realizing they'd been duped too. Karen Brightwater disappeared into the night in the back of a government SUV. The woman who tried to steal a lake had just drowned in her own ambition, and the whole world was watching. 6 months later, Lake Meridian woke to still water and clean air again. No more diesel fumes from surveillance boats. No strangers parked at the end of my drive with cameras pointed at my dock. Just pine-scented wind, cedar planks underfoot, and the sound of trout breaking the surface where my grandfather used to cast his line. Karen Brightwater pleaded guilty to 17 federal charges. 18 months in prison, restitution, her real estate license revoked. Mountain Vista Properties dissolved in bankruptcy when her investors fled under the FBI's spotlight. Her name became shorthand around here for arrogance that underestimates the people who refuse to be pushed out. But that was only part of the story. The state recognized Lake Meridian South as a protected watershed. Property values rose not because of Karen's dream of a private marina, but because conservation made this place rare and untouchable. The university built an ecology research station in partnership with our community, giving graduate students a chance to study these waters while keeping them safe. And the boat, my grandfather's old cruiser, got a full restoration. The same hull Karen called an eyesore now gleams in the sun. A floating memorial named Persistence. At the first annual Lake Meridian Conservation Festival, children climbed on its deck while I told stories about Clifford Wendell driving cedar pilings by hand, building a dock that would outlast bullies and bureaucrats alike. I used part of the settlement to create a veteran property rights fund. We've already helped 3 families stop illegal HOA seizures, and there's a stack of letters on my desk from people around the country who saw our fight on the news. Some are angry. Some are scared. All of them refuse to be intimidated. One of those letters came from a veteran in Montana. His HOA is trying to strip his solar panels for aesthetic reasons. I called him last night, told him what my grandfather told me. When you build something to last, do it right the first time. He laughed, a little shaky, the way I must have sounded months ago when I realized what I was up against. The new HOA board is a mix of old families and reasonable newcomers. We meet under bylaws that require transparency and respect. And every time someone mentions community standards, we all remember what happens when power forgets what community really means. Sometimes I walk to the end of the dock before sunrise, when the lake is nothing but glass and shadow. I can still smell the faint diesel and leather of my grandfather's jacket, still hear his voice telling me to check the ropes twice, to respect the water, and never assume it belongs to you just because you float on top of it. Karen thought she could turn a lake into cash. Clifford Wendell turned it into legacy. The Governor's Environmental Protection Award sits on my mantle now, next to my Navy commendations and my grandfather's fishing photos. Funny thing, the plaque isn't what I'm proud of. It's the letters from neighbors who stayed, who didn't sell, who learned that knowledge and grit beat fear every time. This morning, as the sun burned mist off the water, Ezra joined me on the dock with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He's slower on his feet these days, but his voice is steady. "You think people will remember her name?" he asked. I shook my head. "They'll remember what she tried to do, but they'll remember what we built more." He smiled. "Good. That's how it should be." A Colorado River cutthroat trout broke the surface just then, splashing gold where the light hit its scales. The same endangered fish Karen's patrol boats tried to poison. It vanished beneath the ripples, but for a moment, the lake looked alive with fire. I rested my hand on the restored rail of persistence. "We're not going anywhere," I said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." The wind carried the words across the water like a promise. One my grandfather started, and one I intend to keep long after anyone remembers who tried to take it from us.